Welcome to Fitzan's Property Exchange, hosted by Pearl Skeltimer, designed to keep you informed and captivated about the South African residential property market. Subscribe to our channel today and enjoy conversations with some of the most influential, innovative, and interesting industry experts, stakeholders, and scheme executives as they render input in today's property market.
Hi, hello again. I'm Pearl Skeltimer, the CEO of Fitzan Estates, and welcome to all of you to Fitzan's Property Exchange. Today I'll be introducing a very interesting lady, Johette Smuts. She is Head of Data and Analytics at Payprop, South Africa's largest processor of rental payments for the property management industry. In addition to being the CFA charter holder, Johette is a Stellenbosch University graduate with a BCom Honours degree in Financial Risk Management. She is the author of the Payprop Rental Index, a quarterly guide that outlines trends in the South African residential rental market. Welcome, Johette. How are you doing today?
Hi, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great. And yourself?
I'm fine. I just want this COVID to get over and done with. Oh gosh, I think that's all of us, all of our wishes all together.
I just want to be able to have Christmas lunch without a mask on my face.
Let's hope that's going to happen. So let's kick off. Before we get into the details of the current data, could you give us some background? What is the Payprop Rental Index? What data are you mining and how long has it been running for?
So the data that we have available is actually a byproduct of our main business and a very useful one at that. Payprop itself is a transactional platform for rental agents, and they use it to invoice tenants, to reconcile rental payments, and to make payments to landlords and to themselves and to third parties. So all of this is automated, and the sending of statements to landlords and tenants, that's also all automated. So the rental amounts are mined from the rental invoices that agents create in the system. Agents also manage their damage deposits through Payprop, so we have that data, and they also have the ability to do credit checks through Payprop, which is where we get the data around credit metrics that we often analyze. The rental index itself is a quarterly publication, and that highlights basically what goes on in the rental market. So it usually looks at national and provincial rent levels. We look at rental growth, tenant health, and lately we've also been focusing quite a bit on arrears since it's such a hot topic this year, especially with lockdown. The rental index, so the last part of your question, was started in 2012. I actually recently had a look at the old ones. They're still available on the website, and we have really come a long way from them. So way back in 2012, I actually worked at Payprop. I'm a boomerang employee. After I came back from a gap year abroad, and I actually helped put the first few ones together. Back then, we used an economist to help us, but then Lo took it over, my previous CEO, who now heads up our North American Payprop business. And then a few years ago, Lo approached me to come work for Payprop again, and then I took it over again in 2017. So we've come full circle.
All right, great stuff. So, getting into the latest data, can you tell us how the residential rental industry has been affected by the COVID-19 epidemic? I know this must be a question asked to you 1,000 times, but yes, it's always good to hear different views.
Yeah, of course. So a few things happened because of lockdown. So firstly, tenants couldn't move for a while. That was during the hard lockdown. Many tenants lost their income, so whether it's them or their partner, but household income dropped for quite some time, and people also couldn't travel. So that affected rental growth negatively in two ways. So firstly, a lower income means that demand for more expensive properties were lower. People couldn't necessarily afford their rental increases. And secondly, because of travel restrictions, many short-term let properties that was previously on Airbnb, they were put back on the long-term rental market so that the landlords could get at least some income because those properties were standing empty. And that affected the supply side. So when you see a lower demand and a higher supply, both of these factors suppress rental growth. And that's exactly what we've seen. So, in the first quarter of this year, rental growth year on year, so from the first quarter of last year to the first quarter of this year, was at 3%. But then when lockdown hit, it dipped to 1.5% in the second quarter of this year and to 1.4% now in the last one.
50%.
Yes, that's
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
And we don't really see it picking up anytime soon, So
okay. Don't run ahead. That's part of my following questions. All right. So, sorry for the interruption. Please proceed.
The other perhaps obvious effect that the lockdown had, and I mentioned it earlier, was we could clearly see that arrears were higher, right? But that's kind of obvious when you think that people lose their income. They would probably want to save on one of their bigger expenses. So when we look at arrears, we look at two factors. We first look at the percentage of tenants in arrears, and then we look at the size of arrears relative to rent. So how much does a tenant in arrears actually owe? So we saw an increase in both, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really not surprising. Tenants who were never in arrears could now all of a sudden maybe not afford to pay their rent, or they only paid partially. So that's why the percentage tenants in arrears rose. And then tenants who were already in arrears obviously were now further in arrears.
Yeah, that's just what I wanted to ask you. What about those that were in arrears prior to the lockdown excuse, if I may refer to it?
Yeah, so I mean, people often assume that the baseline is zero, but that's not true. There were people in arrears before lockdown.
That's true. Okay, so what are the main factors affecting the rental growth?
Paul, how much time do you have?
We don't have that much time, but pick up.
Okay, so there are many. I'll only mention a few. Normally, if we consider provincial rental growth, which is something that we look at in the rental index, different factors affect different provinces. So, for example, mining activity and commodity prices can drive demand for rental properties in provinces like Limpopo when there's high mining activity, and then obviously the opposite is true when prices drop and when mining activity stops. And then also in the Northwest, there's a bit of an anomaly. We have a few big clients who do student housing. So the demand for student housing affects the rental growth in Northwest. But may I
ask in the Pretoria, Johannesburg area specifically?
No, so we don't really track areas. We only look at provinces.
Okay, all right. Yeah. In general.
Yeah, in general. So, like I mentioned earlier, supply also plays a role. So we've seen, for example, in the Western Cape, when developers really started developing on a large scale, they flooded the market basically. So that affected the Western Cape's growth. This is now before lockdown. But now, after lockdown, and I think for some time to come, affordability will be one of the main factors that will impact rental growth. And like I just said, it's kind of obvious. If you don't have income, you really can't afford to look for more expensive properties. So that would be the big one going forward, I think.
Okay. So do you see a distant light in the tunnel with regards to arrears? Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, a very, very distant light, Paul. So I'm going to answer this question in two parts, and we're going to look at the two metrics that I mentioned earlier that we look at when we look at arrears. So when we look at the percentage of tenants in arrears, to give you an idea, in March there were about 19% of tenants in arrears, and in May
19.
Yes.
Right.
So, and that spiked in May, actually. So that was quite quick, right? Spiked in May, number increased to 26%. But now, if you think about it, tenants paid their April rent with a paycheck they got at the end of March. So
Yes.
it doesn't
Not being
feel
affected yet. Yeah.
yes, so it doesn't feel right that that number spiked so much, but I think people preempted that they might have financial trouble, so they maybe didn't pay in full, or maybe they just didn't pay their rent for a month. Then in May, it was announced that people could go back to work in June. So that's why it spiked in May. People then started paying their rent in full because they now know that they have an income at the end of June to look forward to. So yeah, it spiked in May, and at the end of September, that was down back to 22.5%. So it's lower than the May figure of 26%, but not quite at the 19% we
Definitely
saw.
not. We are not there by far. I
No,
have
but we
very, very unhappy landlords and
yeah,
very
I
upset
believe.
about the fact that they have to fulfill financial obligations as well. And it seems like the recovery of these arrears is going to take quite a while.
Yes, I agree. But I don't think the tenants in arrears, the percentage of tenants in arrears is such a big issue. It's the size of arrears. So that's the second one that we look at. And that, when you look at the graph and the rental index that will come out soon, you'll see it looks a bit more sticky, right? So in March, a tenant who was in arrears on average owed, let's call it 80%, 78%. So 80% of a month's rent, a rent.
Mm,
The
okay.
increase that we saw in this number was a bit slower. That only peaked in July. But if I can explain it by saying that tenants who are now newly in arrears, so someone who was never in arrears before, but now stopped paying because they preempted their financial difficulty, they have now paid off their arrears. So what's left over, that is now the sticky arrears. So
You call it sticky arrears. Okay.
sticky because that trend is very, very slowly moving down. It's basically flat. So
Okay.
to get from the level that it's at to a pre-lockdown level will take a lot longer. So to give you an idea of the figures, I said it was around 80% in March. It peaked in July at 106%.
Sure. Okay.
And in September, it is at 102%. So, yeah, I
Wow.
think it'll
I
take,
would have thought it would be much better.
yeah, but that's why I say it's the sticky one. So you might
Mm,
now be paying your rent again in full, but you
not
are
the
struggling to
arrears.
pay off your arrears, if I can call it that. Yeah.
Okay, sure. It's a bleak picture, I see. So, what is your prediction? What will happen in the market moving into 2021? Please give us good news.
Phil, if I had a crystal ball, I would be very rich. This is such a difficult question to answer because there are so many factors and they're all pulling in different directions. So I think the big one is that rental growth will continue to be subdued because tenants' financial issues won't disappear overnight. The economy is still recovering, but businesses are increasing their income, their salaries at, I think, maybe a slightly lower pace. Remember that inflation is also lower. So the economy might recover very slowly, and this will definitely affect the rental growth that we'll be seeing in 2021. I think I might be wrong.
Okay, thank you for that. If clients want to have access to this information or to your chart or to your quarterly guide, where do they get that information?
So they can go to payprop.co.za. There's
Would you please just repeat that a little bit slower?
payprop.co.za. So when you get onto that page, you can book a demo. In the top page, someone will contact you, ask you a few questions, and then we can take it from there. At the very bottom of that landing page, you can click on Payprop Rental Index, or you can go to payprop.co.za payprop.com/rental index, and then you can download the index there. You can also subscribe to get the index as soon as it's released in your inbox.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. It was great talking to you, Johette. And good luck to you, and very impressive information. Not good news, all of it though, but thank you so much for sharing. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thanks for having me, Paul.
that's a great pleasure. Ladies and gents, we will talk again soon. Thank you.
This was Fitzan's Property Exchange, hosted by Pearl Skeltimer. Not only do we keep you informed on the very latest in the property industry, we also empower by expanding your knowledge base. Make sure to visit www.fitzan.co.za to find out more about sectional title scheme management, letting, sales and trustee training. Remember to subscribe to our channel and follow us on all our social platforms.